All right, Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, everybody. I don't have anything particularly Christmassy themed. I just thought I'd talk about a topic that's kind of been out there a little bit recently, and that is the idea of civil disobedience, its effectiveness or ineffectiveness. I guess there's no point in denying this is. So I'm just holding the camera. I'm not sure how. This is prompted by, not maybe it's too strong a word to say the controversy, but the dialogue that's kind of come up around the Amanda Billy Rock arrest and whatnot. And I think there's a couple interesting kind of ways to look at it. The basic question is, what is civil disobedience, and then is it or is it not useful generally, and is it not useful for libertarianism, and then how often are specific libertarian acts actually effective civil disobedience is probably the final question. First, civil disobedience is an awfully broad topic. It can go from anything from just not paying taxes to avoiding regulations to all the way to or just not being polite or wasting a government worker's time, or all the way to armed rebellion. And there are many things that can plausibly fall under the moniker of civil disobedience that I think are good. There's a lot of things that I think count as civil disobedience that are happening, in the world today. I think the most outstanding examples have to be people like Bradley Manning and Edward Snowden, to give the most pertinent contemporary examples, although people like Daniel Ellsberg would fall into this category as well. Then there's a lot of, but then the other thing is, there are other reasons to do it. I think even if you don't, the idea with civil disobedience is that you're going to do something that's going to generate either sympathy or a shift in people's ideas. It's going to cause people to, rally to you or rally to your cause. And unfortunately, that's actually a very difficult thing to accomplish. That can happen. There are instances of that happening, but it's very, very selective. The circumstances have to be just right. The people who engage in the civil disobedience have to do it in just such a way, and it's not the same every time, so that you can't assume that every time you're doing any kind of civil disobedience that it's going to rise to that level of effectiveness, because, quite frankly, very little of it does come to that level. Now, if we're talking about in a case like Amanda Billy Rocks, or whatever her name is, of you get pulled over by the cops and you, I don't know, resist them to the extent that you don't answer their questions right away or whatever. Does that count as civil disobedience? I think it does, but how effective is it? Not very. I saw Black Acid Lizard point out, well, look at Rosa Parks, and absolutely Rosa Parks was a tremendously effective piece of civil disobedience. But what people tend to forget is that she was not the first person to refuse to get off of a bus. That had been going on probably without any historical record for ever since there'd been segregation, probably. And there had been actually famous cases where people had done it, and the Southern Poverty Law Center and the ACLU and other civil rights organizations were looking for something to happen, and they decided not to cover those particular events for whatever reason. Maybe they didn't like the character of the person doing it. I think one of them was a woman who was pregnant out of wedlock, and they just thought, if we're going to do this, and she's going to have, back in the 60s or 50s, this big thing where she's, she's had extramarital affair, we don't want to have her be the figurehead, not because necessarily they were against it, but just because they realized the propaganda value. It doesn't look as good. It takes, a weapon out of the enemy's quiver, and so they just waited until they had the perfect storm, or an ideal, or at least an optimal situation, which to essentially exploit, and that was when Rosa Parks finally did it. It wasn't every single time that it happened. So, yes, it can be effective, but to assume that any resistance whatsoever under any circumstances is going to be that effective is kind of foolish. And the other element here is the chances that a random act of civil disobedience is going to rise to that level is very, very unlikely. In fact, there are a lot of people who attempt, they basically orchestrate civil disobedience. What Adam Kokesh did with his shotgun, or what he did earlier when he went to the dance at the Jefferson Memorial, those are orchestrated movements of civil disobedience that are intended and choreographed with the idea of generating the desired results. And the most often when that happens, nothing happens. They don't have the desired effect, or they don't have near as much desired effect as possible. The chances that a random encounter, that a random act of civil disobedience that you happen to record, which, by the way, it's awesome. I think people should record their encounters with police whenever possible. The chances that that would be a terribly influential act of civil disobedience are quite limited. Now, that has happened. I think that happened to Randy Weaver. I don't think that Randy Weaver was intending to engage in civil disobedience. I don't think he was intending to do enormous harm to the federal government. Nevertheless, he did. Now, it caused half of his family getting slaughtered for that to happen, but he did. He shot back. I believe several federal agents died, and he still walks free. He was, I mean, he did the most that you can do in a situation, the most risky, most horrifyingly, essentially suicidal thing you can do, and he eventually walked away with it, and he still walks this earth. And I don't think he was planning that. I don't think he had any notion that that was going to happen, and it just, I don't want to say things worked out, because his wife died, and his son died, and I think one of his friends died, and maybe more. But in terms of civil disobedience, it had quite a profound effect. And, you know, people can debate that, but I've fallen to the class of people who was very much influenced by that, although it was after the fact. However, the chances that your random stop by a cop is going to generate anything close to that is quite small. Now, there are other good reasons to do civil disobedience, even if it doesn't generate a mass public outcry on your behalf or for your cause. It's good practice. It can be good for you just to learn to interact with police. And I tend to take much more an avoidance. You know, if I know there are police, I don't speed. I don't, you know, unless I know there's a very, very low likelihood of that ever coming to mean anything. I practice avoidance. But when you do have to have encounters, it's good for your own, I think good for your own character to be more assertive than passive in those situations. Assertive of your rights and of your political beliefs, because ultimately they are antagonistic to us. To what degree and precisely why is kind of debatable, but they are antagonistic to us. And I don't think that it's wise to be in a position of a totally supine supplication kind of mode. And the frank fact is, it's good practice because in, say, something like when you get pulled over for speeding or whatever, the stakes aren't necessarily going to be very high. Necessarily, they are the police. The potential always exists for them to make the situation worse, to, what's the word, escalate to the point where they can kill you. You always have to be aware that's a possibility. Is it particularly likely every time you get pulled over? No. And so I think that they are good practices. Now my kind of take when I do get pulled over, which isn't too terribly frequently, but I drive enough that it does happen, is to I just tell them I don't have to answer those questions, because you don't have to answer their questions. Otherwise, you would have to be able to incriminate yourself. And typically, every time I've done that, they just stop. I mean, they just realize I'm not going to... They're fishing. Police are obviously fishing. You have to understand that they are looking for bodies to bring in. That's how the meritocracy of their system, how they get evaluated, is how many tickets they write, how many citations, and how many warm bodies they can get in. And so they are always looking, not always, but most of the time, because there are officers who are not like that, but it's so few, and you can't tell by looking at them. Everyone I've encountered, you could tell they're looking for drugs, they're looking for some reason to pull you over, and I'm so fucking boring and clean that they've never had a reason, but they look, and you can tell. And all the small conversation stuff they make, it's not only to look for stuff, but it's also to get you to incriminate yourself, and it just makes sense. Being silent is okay to a point, but then they tend to escalate a little bit, and it's frustrating to just not communicate at all. I prefer just say I don't have to answer that to pretty much everything, you know, and it's pretty boring. They write you a ticket and then they leave. Now, could that go even further? Yes, you could say I'm not going to sign, and they could take you in or whatever. But what would be the point? So. But that's good practice if you like doing that, and I think what we have going on in New Hampshire is within some groups there's a lot of, it's not pure pressure, because nobody there, or very few people that I've witnessed going to PorcFest or just watching the enormous amount of media that comes from the Free State Project, I don't see them pressuring people. I don't see them telling people you have to get arrested. However, many of them do that. Many of the Keeniacs especially engage in civil disobedience and get arrested. And it's almost like a rite of passage. They're not, as far as I can tell, they're not actually telling people you got to do this. But when you see a whole bunch of other people who share your ideology going out on the limb and taking that, it's not hard to imagine wanting to feel that way. And if that's what you're doing, then fine. I mean, it's your life in your hands. It's probably doing more harm to you than it is doing good to others, at least in terms of measurable effects on people's ideology, but it is your life to do that with, and I don't really have a problem. I don't necessarily see the effectiveness, but hey, if you ever find yourself to be poor, that's a good way to get 3 hots in a cot. Not a good way, but a way anyway. So on that level, when I watch her video, which I couldn't really bear watching that much of it, that's all fine. And look, casual encounters with police and the government has been done well by libertarians. The things that come to most mind are, other than like Snowden and Manning, would be the guy who went through the TSA scanners with like the Fourth Amendment written on his chest and naked and whatever, or nearly naked. I think he did go naked, and that went to court, and he won. They had a settlement, which he refused to take, I think, and he just made them all get Fourth Amendment training. So that worked, and that got positive press coverage. And then the other thing that's not strictly libertarian, although it definitely falls into the a category that we share with conservatives, is open carry. There are a lot of people who do open carry get confronted by the police, and how they handle it varies quite a bit. Some of them don't handle it very well. Some of them handle it like amazingly. And I was just watching one. This happened the day after the Aurora, Colorado shooting. In Colorado, a gay couple went to like a gay pride picnic in Boulder, or some kind of outdoor activity in the city of Boulder, and he open carried. And in Colorado, the day after the Aurora shooting, that took some balls, and he was arrested, and he said this is legal, which it was. That's a common thing that happens with open carry, is police assume that it's not legal when in fact in most places it is, and open carriers tend to know where it's legal and when it's not illegal. There are sometimes places you can't go, and there are states where it's not legal. Ironically, states like Texas and Oklahoma, or at least up till recently. And this guy got arrested, and then he sued, and he's getting, it just came out, this was over a year ago that happened, and he just won a settlement from the city. Is paying him like $24,000. And the YouTube video of him got hundreds of thousands of views, and that was pretty effective. And there's actually been, at this point, dozens of encounters of open carry people having confrontations with police, where they talk them down. And if we're talking about libertarians, Pete Eyre of the Motorhome Diaries did this once in New Mexico. Quite amazing, actually. It's kind of a little annoying because you can't see Pete because he's holding the camera, but his girlfriend got pulled over apparently by I think it was in Santa Fe, New Mexico, by a cop. And he strides right on over to the scene and is just filming the whole thing. And of course, the cop immediately notices him with a gun and is like, "What? Whoa, 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 whoa! What's going on here?" And Pete just says, "I'm just making sure that everything's okay." And this guy starts saying, "Okay, well, I need to see your ID, and I need to." And Pete extricated. He was able to leave. He walked away from that without showing them their ID, giving them his name. I think he said my name's Pete, something like that. And he wasn't confrontational. You know, he wasn't aggressive, and he walked away from that. And the look on those two officers' face when he did that was just amazing. Like, what just happened? But I've seen many other videos like that. Again, not necessarily libertarians. I'll try and put links to some, but those all seem pretty effective. Those are people kind of asserting their rights, not giving government carte blanche, indicating, you know, a degree of, look, there's only so far you can go, don't go any further than that, without being overtly threatening, where, you know, it's not like, don't go too far or I'm going to pull this out, because they all know that would be suicide, at least eventually. I mean, you might win out a shootout, but, you know, you do that, they're going to escalate to the point where they are going to try and kill you. You're going to end up like Christopher Dorner, most likely, unless you're the one of those guys like Randy Weaver who just happened. Maybe that's because the Feddies were less effective. I don't know. So, you know, there's a lot that happens that way. There's a lot that's happened with the Fourth Amendment. I even think when Adam Kokesh did his dancing protest, that got a lot of relatively positive play in the media. So in that respect, you know, it can be effective. Now, with these traffic violations, people don't think, and this is what I think some people miss. People don't view getting pulled over for speeding or some other violation as some horrible imposition on your liberty, and so they're not likely to sympathize with you then. Now, I think what really makes these events cringeworthy, from my point of view, and I think for other libertarians, is that sometimes the people who engage in this have a very unrealistic notion of what's going to happen. I think that there's enough of a libertarian population, enough of a libertarian media presence, enough of an echo chamber, for lack of a better term, that people can get the impression that the sliver of libertarians that they see is representative of the entire mass society. And, you know, like Adam Kokesh. And what Adam Kokesh did with his shotgun, honestly, to me, it's just, if we're going to just debate that, I mean, it should obviously be, it's unremarkably legal almost everywhere in the country except for D.C. and New York and a few other places. And, you know, what he did I don't think was wrong, but what was cringeworthy was his, you know, if we don't get what we want, there's going to be a march on Washington. And it's like, who's going to march with you? If every single person who ever watched your videos and agreed with you at least even a little bit decided to show up, which is highly, I mean, they're spread all over the world, what are the odds that they're going to have the gumption or the ability or the desire to do that? Very, very little. But even if all of them did, you're talking about a few thousand people, not millions and millions. And the idea that all of them are going to show up is just ridiculous. It's like you don't even get all of your subscribers to watch a single video, let alone carpool to DC to engage in an armed march onto the Capitol. You know, cool as that would be, it's just not going to happen right now. Now, maybe things will change, maybe that's part of the change, but you know, it's this kind of, I have a lot of fans, and it seems like it's the whole Dunbar number. It's more people than you can keep track of. And so it seems like, you know, there's this huge mass movement when look, there's a lot of encouraging things going on, but it's easy to forget how many people aren't. And I think if you just go and you read like a normal news article like on CNN or a Fox or an ABC News article, or read the Huffington Post or PBS or whatever, and you read the comment section, and you get, you know, instead of, because look, yeah, you look on a YouTube video put out by an anarcho-capitalist and everyone's going to agree. You know, you read a Mises article and everyone's going to agree. You go to the anarcho-capitalist subreddit And yeah, there's a couple hellraisers, and there's some disagreement, and there's some good debate, but mostly people agree. And it's easy to start thinking, man, everybody believes in this, you know. And it's fun to see that one testimonial. Somebody pretty recently was just like, oh, I believe in it. I never heard of this, and it just makes so much sense. And it's easy to think, mass movement. But that literally is one guy out of 310 million people just in the United States, assuming he was even from the United States. You know, and as good as that is, and as encouraging as that is, you don't want to delude yourself into thinking, okay, you know, we've got this huge mass movement, because we don't. There's a lot of ideological influence. It's, you know, libertarian rhetoric has kind of creeped in to the mainstream. It's always been there to some extent, because the Republicans and the Democrats both, in different ways, kind of have some vestigial libertarian rhetoric in there. But it's crept in there in some different ways, and there's been some mass media stuff with like Freedom Watch and you know, a lot of this whistleblowers. I mean, it's getting in there. It's in their own ways that it hasn't been there before, which is not necessarily a prelude to libertarian Ancapistan. It's a nice step, and I certainly welcome it. But to think that everyone in the country, or a huge part of the country, is like that is ridiculous. And in Billy Rock's video, she said something like, well, we're going to phone wave. I think when she was still arrested, which is no longer the case. She's like, I want there to be a phone tidal wave of people calling, you know, and she even said something like, everyone whose name starts with A, call today. And it's like, so she believes that so many people are going to call on her behalf that she should subdivide it by the alphabet. And, you know, what, because she wants to keep going for 26 days, or because she thinks so many people will call that, you know, they'll all just won't be able to make it, and it'll be a waste, and so we need to, you know. And somebody commented that they did call, and they were told, and this may well have been a lie, but I don't think so in this case, that they had only received 6 calls. And it's just embarrassing when you see somebody who, you know, it's like somebody leading a parade and there's no one behind them. It's kind of like that person's not quite aware of reality to the extent that, you know, the rest of us are. So I think that's the most cringeworthy part, by the way, of what she did, is just kind of the lack of awareness of where the societal zeitgeist is, and the overestimation of, you know, what your popularity means and what it entails. People are popular for lots of reasons. Like, I think a lot of people like to listen to me, and they spend a lot of time listening to me, but that doesn't mean I think they're going to, you know, jump in their cars and come to my rescue or send me money or anything like that. And Amanda Billy Rock has thousands of people who like her, and, you know, nothing to knock her too much, but a lot of that has to do with the fact that she's female. Which, okay, fine, we need more females in the libertarian movement. But for her to then think, you know, all these people are then going to rise up in my defense, very few of them are going to do very much. And mostly because they realize that it wouldn't do any good. And, you know, Kokesh, I think, a similar thing. You know, he's this big popular, he's basically a celebrity in within a certain circle, so he thinks that this is going to be a big deal, or he thought. I don't know if he still does. Well, he realizes that it didn't pan out. He thought there was going to be this mass movement. That was one interesting thing from the Molyneux debate. He kind of alluded that he was thinking there would be this big uprising of some kind. I don't think literally a mass martial one, but when it didn't materialize, I think it was something of a wake-up call to him. But that's the most cringeworthy thing. The civil disobedience element, maybe it wasn't handled great, but, you know, I don't think any harm done. It's their freedom, not mine, and if they want to spend it doing that so much, they'll do better next time, hopefully. And my camera's going to die, so I'll talk to y'all later. Bye-bye. Merry Christmas.